Apane Caitanya Mali Skanda Upajila. Shri Sparapurerute Ankura Pushkaya. Shri Sparapurerute Ankura Pushkaya. Apane Caitanya Mali Skanda Upajila. Apane Caitanya Mali Skanda Upajila. Shri Ishwarapuri. By the name Shri Ishwarapuri. Rupe. In the form of Ankura, the seed, Pushta, cultivated, Haila, became, Apane, himself, Caitanya Mali, the gardener of the name Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, Skandha, trunk, Upajila, expanded. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The seed of devotional service next fructified in the form of Sri Ishwarapuri. And then the gardener himself, Caitanya Mahaprabhu, became the main trunk of the tree of devotional service. Please repeat. The seed of devotional service. Next fructified in the form of Sri Ishwarapuri. And then the gardener himself, Caitanya Mahaprabhu, became the main trunk of the tree of devotional service. Purport. Sri Ishwarapuri was a resident of Kumarahata, where there is now a railroad station known as Kamarhati. Nearby there is also another station named Hali Shahara, which belongs to the Eastern Railway that runs from the eastern section of Calcutta. Ishwarapuri appeared in a Brahmana family and was the most beloved disciple of Srila Madhavendra Puri. In the last portion of Caitanya Caritamrita, chapter 8, verses 26 to 29, it is stated, I'll read the English translation, at the last stage of his life, Sri Madhavendra Puri became an invalid and was completely unable to move. And Ishwarapuri so completely engaged himself in his service that he personally cleaned up his stool and urine. Always chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra and reminding Sri Madhavendra Puri about the pastimes of Lord Krishna in the last stage of his life, Ishwarapuri gave the best service among his disciples. Thus Madhavendra Puri, being very pleased with him, blessed him, saying, "My dear boy, I can only pray to Krishna that he will be pleased with you." Thus Ishwarapuri, by the grace of his spiritual master Sri Madhavendra Puri, became a great devotee in the ocean of love of Godhead. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti states in his Guru Vashtaka prayer, Yasya prasada bhagavat prasado, yasya prasada nagatikatopi. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one is benedicted by the mercy of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. It is by the mercy of the spiritual master that one becomes perfect, as vividly exemplified here. A Vaishnava is always protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but if he appears to be an invalid, this gives a chance to his disciples to serve him. Ishwarapuri pleased his spiritual master by service, and by the blessings of his spiritual master he became such a great personality that Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as his spiritual master. Srila Ishwarapuri was the spiritual master of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, but before initiating Lord Caitanya he went to Navadvip and lived there for a few months in the house of Gopinath Acharya. At that time Lord Caitanya became acquainted with him, and it is understood that he served Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu by reciting his book, Krishna Lilamrita. This is explained in Chaitanya Bhagavatam, Adi-lila, 7th chapter. to teach others by example how to be a faithful disciple of one's spiritual master, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, visited the birthplace of Ishwara Puri at Karmahati and collected some earth from his birth site. This he kept very carefully, and he used to eat a small portion of it daily. This is stated in the Chaitanya Bhagavatam, chapter 12. It has now become customary for devotees following the example of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu to go there and collect some earth from that place. Omagana Timanandasya Ginanjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmanitanjana Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Gachalam Pangam Namhate Gurumyat Kripa Tamaham Dante Sri Gurum Dinataranam. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master has very kindly come, forced open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. With the grace of the spiritual master, even a lame man can cross over mountains, a blind man can see stars in the sky, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. So before Krishna appears on any planet and in any universe, he always sends forth at least one or two generations of his very confidential, intimate devotees to, if you like, set the scene, pave the way for whatever mission the Lord is about to achieve and whatever pastimes he is about to perform. So it was the case before Mahaprabhu appeared that many personalities appeared, like Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Mata, Chandrasekhar Acharya and his wife, the sister of Sachi Mata, his uncle and auntie of Mahaprabhu, Advaita Acharya and his wife Sita, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Namacharya, Brahma Haridas, and many other personalities, including Srila Ishwara Puri, who would serve the Lord in the capacity of his spiritual master, and Madhavendra Puri, the grand spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. So one might ask, when God appears, what is the need for him to, he is omniscient, he knows everything, but still, to set the example, he takes initiation and serves a spiritual master. And these exalted personalities like Madhavendra Puri and Srila Ishwara Puri, there is a delightful verse or quotation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which we'll read. The seed of the doctrines of Lord Chaitanya can be found with Sripad Madhavendra Puri. He was the first shoot of the desire tree of divine love, which came out of the Madhva lineage. Prior to his appearance, there was no sign of the conjugal mood of devotion in the Madhva line. So, Ishwara Puri also fully understood this mood of his spiritual master, Madhavendra Puri. And we will read in many places in this particular chapter, comparisons are given with Lord Chaitanya being the gardener and the Bhakti-lata Bij, the creeper of devotion, which is planted in the heart of the aspiring devotee by the spiritual master at the time of initiation, and of trees in general. And it's interesting that Madhavendra Puri has been identified by Kavi Kanapur in the Gauragana Deshtipika as a Kalpavriksha tree in Goloka Vrindavan. And his service is to distribute the fruits of love of Godhead to the devotees. So in the same mood when Madhavendra Puri appeared in this world as the grandfather spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya, he had that same mood, which wasn't there so much before in the Madhva line. And so he brought that and he propagated that, another word which can be used in gardening sense. He propagated that deeper understanding, especially of the mood of separation, Vipralamba Seva, or Vipralamba Bhava, which is there in all the residents of Vrindavan, especially, who would sometimes be separated from Sri Krishna and would experience intense feelings of separation when the Lord was not with them. So we can give a little, we can say a little bit about some of the wonderful pastimes of Srila Ishwara Puri. He is described as the sapling from the sprouted seed. Everyone knows big trees, they start out just as a seed, tiny seed, and then they sprout. So that was Madhavendra Puri, and then his very dear disciple, Srila Ishwara Puri, is likened to a sapling. Not much is known about his early life, except the name of his father is given as Shama Sundar Acharya. And he appeared in Kumarahata, is his birthplace. And that is described as a seat of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because many, many wonderful devotees of Mahaprabhu also appeared in Kumarahata. And Mahaprabhu said, actually, the dust from Kumarahata is as dear to me as my life. And he, as we say, not much is known about his early life, but he by the time he met Lord Chaitanya, he was in the renounced order of life, and he had composed one book, which Srila Prabhupada has mentioned in his purport there, Sri Krishna Adi-lila. And it would appear that he spent a considerable amount of time in Gaya, Dham, and that perhaps, well, not perhaps, but that Madhavendra Puri had one ashram there, one temple there, and for that reason his very dear disciple spent a good amount of time there. But he and the Lord first met in Navadvip, when Ishwara Puri was visiting there and actually staying with Gopinath Acharya for some months. And there was very delightful descriptions given in Chaitanya Bhagavat of the first meeting between Srila Ishwara Puri and Lord Chaitanya, where Ishwara Puri, they met in the street, on the footpath in Navadvip. And Ishwara Puri eyes fell on this most divine form of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by some of his students. By that time, Mahaprabhu had opened his own school. And Ishwara Puri, they stopped in the street, and Ishwara Puri inquired as to the identity. O best of Brahmins, please, who are you? He could see that Lord Chaitanya had a perfect form and was very grave. And one of the students of Lord Gauranga answered, for the Lord, you do not know? This is the famous Nimai Pandit of Nadia. So Nimai was very humble, and he immediately invited Sripad, please come, with me to my house for lunch. It would be my good fortune to serve you, to feed you. So in that way, that was the very first meeting, and immediately Ishwara Puri accompanied the Lord to his house for lunch. Sachimata had already cooked many preparations, offered them to their household Kormashila. And afterwards, Lord Chaitanya sat with Ishwara Puri and they discussed topics of Krishna. And there are other wonderful pastimes described there of how Ishwara Puri also visited Advaita Acharya in Shantipur. And Mukunda Dutt was there at that time also. And being very humble, Ishwara Puri just sat off to one corner, and Advaita Acharya was very busily doing some duties. But Mukunda Dutt recognized Ishwara Puri as a great Vaishnava sannyasi, and he started to sing. And Mukunda Dutt was a very famous kirtan singer. He began to sing some shlokas about Sri Krishna and his pastimes. And immediately Ishwara Puri could not contain his ecstatic emotions, and he fell on the ground and was manifesting all these wonderful symptoms. So at that time, Advaita Acharya realized he had a great saint in his household, and asked as to the identity of Ishwara Puri, who humbly revealed himself to be no more than a very low-born Sudra. But of course that was not the case. So it was a very delightful meeting at that point between those two also. And during the months that Ishwara Puri spent in Navadvip, Nimai took advantage and took many opportunities to serve him, inviting to his home, even cooking for him personally, and offering him sandalwood pulp and garlanding him. So in this way their relationship developed to the point that some time later, Nimai, after the disappearance, Nimai Pandit, Lord Chaitanya, went to Gaya to perform the final rites, the last rites for his departed father, Jagannath Mishra. And again they met, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu requested initiation from Srila Ishwara Puri in Gaya. So, and then of course, Ishwara Puri felt himself the most fortunate personality to have such a wonderful disciple as Lord Chaitanya, of course known as Nimai Pandit in those days. And at the time of his initiation, it's said that he gave him some instructions, 4 instructions. And one is very famous, which the Lord actually repeated to the Mayavadis of Varanasi, Prakashananda Saraswati and others, the famous Harinama verse, Harinama, 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 Kevalam Kalo Nasteva 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 Gati Anyata. If something's very important in the Vedic literature, it's mentioned 3 times. So in that famous verse, I think from the Kali Santarana Upanishad, it's mentioned 3 times that in this age of Kali, there's no other way, no other way, no other way except Harinam, Harinam, Harinam. So that was one instruction which Ishwara Puri gave to Lord Chaitanya at the time of his initiation, and that was the verse that Lord Chaitanya repeated to Prakashananda Saraswati when the Venerable Mayavadi sannyasi complained that Lord Chaitanya, instead of chanting and dancing with other emotional sentimentalists, he should be, as a young sannyasi, studying Vedanta and meditating. And Lord Chaitanya said, my my spiritual master considered me a great fool. He said I wasn't qualified to study Vedanta, but I should just always chant. I should always just keep Krishna's name on my lips. So that was one instruction. And another instruction was that the jiva can achieve all freedom simply by this process of chanting Krishna's name. And third instruction was beyond dharma, artha, kama, moksha is prema, love for Krishna. We all know those by performing pious activities, one gets economic development, and with economic development one can gratify one's senses, and when one becomes dissatisfied with that, one can achieve liberation or moksha. So prema pramartha mohan was the instruction that Ishwara Puri gave to Lord Chaitanya, which is often repeated. The fifth goal of life, to develop love for Krishna. And the fourth instruction was very famous verse, Nachagayo Bhakta Sanghe Kara Sankirtan Krishna Nam Upadeshi Hara Savajana. That my dear child, continue chanting, dancing, performing Sankirtan in the company of devotees. Furthermore, go out and preach the glories of Krishna Nam, the holy names of Krishna. For by so doing you will be able to deliver all fallen souls. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set an example for all of us, took those instructions very seriously, especially when he returned from Gaya to Navadvip. At that point there he manifested his divine spiritual potency as the Supreme Lord from that point on. So, and of course, it would appear that from that point on, Srila Ishwara Puri left the area, and being very elderly, he made his way to Vrindavan, and he left this world in Vrindavan, and his samadhi is there in the area of the 64 samadhi site in Vrindavan. There was no more, it doesn't appear that there was any more contact from that point on between Srila Ishwara Puri and Lord Chaitanya. But before leaving this world, Srila Ishwara Puri instructed two of his disciples, Govinda and Kashishvara Pandit, that he wanted them, after Lord Chaitanya also wound up his pastimes in Navadvip and moved on his mother's order to Jagannath Puri, Ishwara Puri instructed these two other disciples, you go, you move to Jagannath Puri and you serve Sri Krishna Chaitanya, which is delightful in the sense that they were godbrothers, and Lord Chaitanya protested when they arrived on their guru's order in Puri. He said, well, this is not proper, we're godbrothers, I'm not going to accept service from you. But that was overruled by the fact that their Gurudev had asked them to go and to serve their godbrother. So reluctantly Lord Chaitanya accepted service from these two. Govinda would take care of the Lord, and Kashishvara also, who was very tall like Mahaprabhu and very stout and strong. He would go ahead of the Lord, especially when there were huge crowds in the Jagannath Temple, and he would make sure that Lord Chaitanya was not inconvenienced. He would part the crowds and allow the Lord to come and have darshan beside the Garuda Stamba of Lord Jagannath to his heart's content. So it's also interesting at the same time that after Lord Chaitanya left Navadvip, Srivas Thakur and his brothers and all of their children and wives, they also could not bear to stay in Navadvip in separation from Lord Gauranga. They actually left Navadvip also and went to live in Kumarahata for the rest of lives. So it's a little bit. So, and of course at that time, after his initiation, I think we mentioned, Lord Chaitanya wound up his scholastic pastimes as a great scholar, the famous scholar of Nimai Pandit. Now, another very famous pastime, and you can read all these pastimes right here in the Caitanya Caritamrita, especially there's a wonderful chapter 4 of the Adi-lila, which is a very long chapter, at least 200 verses. And that chapter is actually entitled The Devotional Service of Madhavendra Puri. So these two great personalities were paving the way. And of course, as Prabhupada has so wonderfully written in Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, at the end of Madhavendra Puri's life, Ishwara Puri was his disciple who took care of him very, very nicely and received the blessings of Madhavendra Puri at the end of his life by taking such nice care of him. And of course there was one other disciple who was present at that time. He's infamous. His name is Ramchandra Puri. And he sadly had not inculcated or absorbed the mood of his spiritual master. He was heavily tinged by Mayavad philosophy. So at the time that Madhavendra Puri was leaving this world, he was lamenting. And he was quoting a very famous verse. So we'll repeat that because this is much more tasteful and relishable. But we'll get back to Ramchandra Puri in a moment. But the text, and it's text 197 from the Adi-lila chapter 4. It's a very famous verse in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And it's said that Srimati Radharani is the original speaker of this verse. And some of you may know it. I'll quote it. O my Lord, O most merciful Master, O Master of Mathura, when shall I see you again? Because of my not seeing you, my agitated heart has become unsteady. O most beloved one, what shall I do now? So Madhavendra Puri was quoting this verse at the end of his life, and it's said by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami that there are only 3 people who truly understand this verse. The first is Srimati Radharani herself, Madhavendra Puri, and Lord Chaitanya. There is no 4th person. So that's Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And this verse is mentioned in many of the Goswami's writings, such as the Padyavali, Srila Rupa Goswami's Shloka book, and many other verses, many other books as well. When Ramchandra Puri heard his spiritual master apparently lamenting in this way, he had the audacity, the foolishness, because he was not a pure, unalloyed Vaishnava, to criticize and try to instruct his spiritual master at the end of his life. But at this point in time, you should be na sochati, na kanchati, neither lamenting or hankering, which from external frame, you should just be focusing on Brahman. So Madhavendra Puri severely chastised Ramchandra Puri. He sent him away. He banished him. He said, "Get out of my sight. I don't want to see you again. If I have to see you at the end of my life, then I'm going to take a very sinful birth." So Ramchandra Puri was sent away from that place. It's very interesting that, and then of course, it would appear that he wasn't done then, but of course he became a great critic and fault finder of the Vaishnavas, even appearing at one point in time in Jagannath Puri, much to the distress of the devotees. And he has been identified by Kavi Karnapur as the incarnation of Jatila, Krishna Lila. We know there was Jatila and Kutila. Jatila was the mother-in-law of Srimati Radharani, the mother of Abhimanyu, the so-called husband of Sri Radha, and Kutila was the sister of Abhimanyu. So, of course, they helped facilitate, again, the Parakya rasa, which is considered superior amongst the Parakya and Swakya rasas. Parakya rasa refers to Krishna consorting with Srimati Radharani and her gopi beloveds in Braja, even though they weren't so-called married. It's considered superior to the Lord's consorting with his many wives in Dwarka, Swakya rasa. So, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself identified Ramachandra Puri as Kutila, which is interesting. And because, but what is there, what makes the Parakya rasa superlative to the Swakya rasa is that it's more relishable, it is more exciting and more adventurous. Exciting and relishable. So that was another instant, and because Ishwarapuri served his spiritual master so nicely at the end of his life that he got the full blessings of Madhavendra Puri to have none other than the Supreme Lord as his own disciple. So we can I've got another page here. All right, so because they are interconnected, we might just say something also. Very famous pastime of Madhavendra Puri. Because this pastime was repeated to Lord Chaitanya when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we know after he took sannyas, he travelled with Lord Nityananda and two other very confidential associates to take up his new residence in Jagannath Puri. So on the way, the Lord and his associates stopped in different holy places. And one of those places is a famous temple of Lord Gopinath at Ramuna. Shirakura Gopinath, he became famous as. And Lord Chaitanya had heard this pastime directly from his spiritual master Ishwarapuri about Ishwarapuri's spiritual master Madhavendra Puri. He was a very famous personality and had many wonderful devotees, disciples, such as Advaita Acharya, Pundarik Vijayanidhi, Ishwarapuri, and there are some others here. Paramananda Puri, Brahmananda Puri, Raghupati Upadhyaya, just some of the many disciples. So, sometime before, Madhavendra Puri, who preferred to travel alone. When you travel on your own, you don't have to engage in any conversation with anybody if you don't want to. So he preferred to travel in that way. Though he did sometimes spend time in different holy places. He spent 2 years in Govardhan on one occasion, and we will mention that shortly as well. But at least on this particular occasion, Madhavendra Puri was staying in the temple of Lord Gopinath at Ramuna. And in the evening he saw that the local pujaris brought the bhoga for the Lord's enjoyment. And there were pots of a very famous sweet rice preparation. And the pujaris brought those onto the altar, and Madhavendra Puri, he was on his way. We'll have to backtrack a little bit here. He was coming from Govardhan, where he had recently rediscovered a famous deity of Gopal, which had been installed 4,500 years before by one of Krishna's great grandsons, Brajanabha, the son of Aniruddha. But because of attacks by the Mohammedans, the pujari who was looking after that very famous deity of Gopal had hid him in some bushes in the vicinity of Govardhan and run away and never come back. He may have even left this world. So I'm going to have to tell this story. When Madhavendra Puri was staying in Govardhan, and he'd adopted the profession of not even bothering to beg, but just to, if someone offered him something to eat, he would accept it, otherwise he would just fast. And it's said that he'd never experienced hunger or thirst, completely aloof from the bodily conception of life. But on one particular evening, a very charming cowherd boy came with a pot of milk there and gave it to Madhavendra Puri and inquired after his well-being and what type of meditation he was doing. And this charming boy said some of the local ladies saw Madhavendra Puri sitting there and chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, not appearing to eat anything, so they've given me this milk to give to you, and I'll come back later and get the pot. The boy never came back, but Madhavendra Puri, later on that evening, he dozed a little and he had a dream where the very same boy came to him and said, actually, I reside in these bushes, I'll show you the way, come with me. And he led him to a particular place in the forested area of Govardhan. And he said, for many years I've been forced to reside here when the Mohammedans attacked and the Pujari ran away, and it's very hot in summer, it's very cold in winter, and I'm experiencing a great deal of inconvenience here. Can you please tomorrow gather up some of the strong men from the village, tell them to come with spades, and you please take me out of here, build me a nice temple. That would be, I've been waiting for you, Madhavendra Puri, to come and render this service for a very long time, so you're finally here. So when the dream broke, Madhavendra Puri was ecstatic, realizing that cowherd boy was in fact the Supreme Lord himself. So it's a very wonderful description. Again, you can read that in the 4th chapter of the Adi-lila. But the Anakuta, wonderful festivities that took place, so much detail, very relishable. Encourage everyone to go to that section. But a wonderful installation. And at that point, Madhavendra Puri did stay for 2 years, and he trained up other brahmanas in the renounced order of life who came from Bengal. But after 2 years, the deity of Gopal, who is now worshipped in Nathdwar in Rajasthan and is famous as Nathji, he was again moved because of the persecution of the Islamists. But before that time, the deity requested Madhavendra Puri, I'm still hot, still very hot. You please go to Jagannath Puri and purchase some sandalwood and bring it back here to rub on my body to reduce the heat. So Madhavendra Puri set off. And on his way to Jagannath Puri was when he stopped in Ramuna and had this. So we're back to Madhavendra Puri, desiring to know the ingredients of this famous sweet rice preparation, where the Pujaris actually cook the sweet rice down and down and down, and continually adding more and more milk. So the rice actually completely dissolves, it becomes like a paste. So Madhavendra Puri chastised himself when he thought this was a very illicit thought. He's wanting to taste the preparation that hadn't yet been fully offered to the deity. So he walked out of the temple room and he went and found a stall in the local marketplace to sleep for the night, admonishing himself. But then that night, the deity of Gopinath woke up his pujari and said, I have kept one pot of sweet rice. I've hidden it in between my dhoti and the curtain on the altar. You please come on the altar, get this pot, find Madhavendra Puri and give it to him. So that's exactly what the pujari did. He took bath, went on the altar, found as the Lord had said, went to the marketplace, was calling out at night time, Madhavendra Puri, the most fortunate Madhavendra Puri. So, and just by tasting that sweet rice preparation, not only did he honour it, but he broke the pot afterwards, and every day he would eat a little bit. He would dissolve a little bit of that clay pot, and he would continue to honour that for as long as he could. In the same way that Caitanya Mahaprabhu took some of the dust from the birth site of his spiritual master, Srila Ishwara Puri, and most wonderfully, the followers of Caitanya Mahaprabhu over the last so long, what has happened in Kumarahata is that when the devotees saw Lord Chaitanya taking dust from the appearance site of his spiritual master and wrapping it in his cloth and honouring a little bit every day, everybody else did the same. So much so that a huge lake, a huge pond was excavated and it filled up with water. So that's there now, and that has a particular name, which is very much known as the Caitanya. Let's just find it here. Yes, it's known as the Caitanya Doba, or the pond created by Lord Chaitanya's followers. So, just to cover this pastime. So eventually, Madhavendra Puri, after this pastime with Shirakura Gopinath, he did go on to Puri, and he met with the leading pujaris. And because he was such an influential person, it's said that fame followed him. Even he didn't want fame. He was so famous everywhere he went. And he explained to the king of Puri and the leading pujaris in the temple that my deity Gopal in Vrindavan has requested. So they made all arrangements, and they provided with him with a large quantity of sandalwood and also some camphor. And they also gave him 2 assistants, one brahmana and one servant, to carry the sandalwood, which is very heavy, all the way back to Vrindavan, which is over 1,000 miles. And on his return, they also gave him documentation like travel papers so that he would not be harassed at all of the different river crossings and borders. He would be given free passage. He wouldn't have to pay. It was a document from the king. You let this great saintly person and his assistants pass through without paying any taxes. So on his way back to Vrindavan, again they stopped in at Ramuna, and again Madhavendra Puri had another dream where Gopal in Vrindavan said, "Just rub the sandalwood on the body of Gopinath. I and Gopinath are non-different. So no need to come all the way back." So Madhavendra Puri did that. He made arrangements with the pujaris in Shirakora Gopinath's temple, and every day 2 or 3 devotees would grind the sandalwood, and it was summertime, so it was very hot. So the deity would be covered in sandalwood very nicely like that. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami describes how merciful Krishna is, that Madhavendra Puri was willing to make this incredible endeavour for service, to travel over 1,000 miles to get sandalwood and bring it back for his deity. But the Lord, being very merciful, did not want his devotee to go to so much trouble, and being non-different with Lord Gopinath, that arrangement was made there. For those of us into a little bit of detail regarding sandalwood, Hare Krishna. Where is it? Okay. Oh yes, here we are. Okay. Now, in the purport, in this 4th chapter, Prabhupada does write, wonderful purport, that sandalwood, Malaya sandalwood, comes from the Malabar coast in Kerala. Also known Kerala is of course in the very southwestern side of the subcontinent of India. Also known as the Western Ghats, Nilgiri, Malaya Parvata. And in this regard, Prabhupada mentions how sandalwood also once upon a time was grown extensively in what is modern day Malaysia. But because Malaysia, and Prabhupada mentions Malaysia, Indonesia and Java are no longer Vedic, being, if you like, converted to the Islamic faith. But in modern days, they are mostly growing rubber trees. So I better stop there. I've gone over time, but so much here. Any questions, comments, or corrections? Otherwise, we can.
Can you repeat that there was Govinda and his brother?
Yeah, Kashyapara Pandit.
What was his service? Was he also service?
Yes, he was the large-bodied disciple of Ishwara Puri, and he would go ahead of Caitanya Mahaprabhu into the Jagannath temple and just part the crowds. He was like the bodyguard, if you like. Kashyapara Pandit. Yeah. All right, yes, Krishna River.
Just a question to the. I thought you mentioned that the care that pujaris made for using the luminaries cooked down so much of the rice dissolved. I didn't realise there was actually rice in it. I thought it was just kheer, cooked down milk.
That's what I've heard. I heard that from Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, who's been there. He's travelled very widely in India. So I got that little snippet of information from him.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I've also been to Ramuna.
Okay.
I was a young brahmachari, so
Okay.
I probably was mistaken. But I was very fortunate when I was in Ramuna and was just before Mangalarti time, and I was circumambulating Madhavendra Puri's samadhi.
Okay, wow.
The very, very old brahmachari there, very, very old. He opened up the little trellis, not the trellis, the little door, and he broke off a little piece of Madhavendra Puri's koran and gave it to me.
His
what? His koran, the wooden shoes.
Oh, his wooden shoes. Oh,
it's very, very old.
Hare Krishna.
He broke
Wow.
off a little bit. It's just gone into like dust now.
Oh, that, you're very fortunate. Wow, what prashadam you got, what mercy. No. Wow, very fortunate. Oh, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. Hari Bol, yeah.
I just had a question about the prayer that you did at the beginning of the class, something about a spiritual master and then finding obviously the stars, and then touch the book you had. And I was just wondering if that was like a verse or a prayer or where it came from.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from, but it's, Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Manghayake Gurum That Kripa Tamaham Vande Sugilam Caritamrita. Yes, it's very famous, and quite often our devotees recite that before we attempt to speak. It's exactly where it is, I can't remember, but it's probably if somebody has an electronic device. KK, do you want to do a quick Google search and just, or maybe share that? Not,
I think it's in purport in Caitanya, and gives a reference there with it's from.
okay, all right. The Srimad Bhagavatam is just now coming, but it is in our Caitanya literature. Yeah, I can probably
Prabhupada says sometimes that Vaishnava thought said, in relation to Ukam Karati Vaishnava, he says the Vaishnava thought said.
Oh, okay.
And then same reference for it.
Okay. A Vaishnava poet says, okay, thanks for that. Yeah. That's some help. All right, so we'll stop here, everyone. Thank you so much. Jai Sri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.